This podcast is brought to you by PLI, the Practicing Law Institute. PLI is committed to keeping you ever current on topics that matter to you, like artificial intelligence. Learn more at pli.edu/AIPod.
Welcome to AI in Data Law, part of the PLI Evercurrent podcast. I'm William Tanenbaum, host of the podcast and head of AI and data practice at Moses & Singer in New York. In this series, we bring you the latest perspectives on AI and data through timely talks with thought leaders working at the intersection of AI, data, and the law. My guest in this episode is Steve Ardire, a startup advisor and force multiplier, and our topic is the world of healthcare startups. All right, we're starting to chat here. So, Steve, we've been working on some really interesting stuff lately, and this has really been fun with all the developments in AI and healthcare. And it's just great to see you again. You're looking really good on my screen, I got to say that. Anyhow, I'd like to welcome you to the podcast. And Steve is, according to LinkedIn, Steve is an AI startup advisor and, quote, force multiplier, unquote. So, Steve, I know what you do, and I think this is a pretty cool title on how you work with healthcare and emerging companies and especially emerging tech. But since that's such an interesting title, I'm going to let you explain what that means in daily life.
Thank you, Bill. And it's great to reconnect with you and, more importantly, do this podcast together. I think we've got some great topicality that we're going to get to. So, yes. So I adopted the force multiplier about 15 years ago because rather than getting chinked into a particular bucket, whether it be strategy, business development, marketing, or sales, I do all of that and more for my engagements with startups. So the force multiplier really kind of aggregates those separate disciplines into a framework. And that's how I engage to help guide and scale early stage and some growth stage startups. So my deliverables include everything from sharpening the business strategy, getting the right, product market fit, enhance the pitches, put together for funding, typically seed to Series A is my sweet spot.
Yep.
And then take an operational role, which is Chief Partnerships Officer, which is like a analog to force multiplier. And so I've been doing this for over 25 years, the past 10 in AI. And as you said, I now specialize in AI for healthcare, mental health and wellness, brain care, functional lifestyle medicine, precision nutrition, and digital therapeutics. And the last thing to convey before we plunge in more is that I've been doing a lot of podcasts and webinars. I have more to do in addition to speaking at live events. But in mid-August, I did a webinar on augmented intelligence would become the future of work in healthcare, and it has over 4,000 impressions now.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. That's really good. People should watch that. It's really interesting. So let's start there with augmentation in healthcare. I think that's it's both an intriguing and interesting and topic that needs a little explication. So I've just waved the start flag at you. So jump in to augment it.
Okay. So I've been using, instead of AI, since I did a presentation at an IBM Watson event back in 2018, where I introduced augmented intelligence. And the definition of that is you're not relegating everything just to the machines, like in AI.
Yeah.
Your humans are working with machines. So there's still a clinician, an MD, a person in the loop if it's outside of healthcare, right? So it's now becoming more of an accepted term. The good news, people are starting to get it. And you just can't relegate healthcare or generative AI per se. You still need humans in the loop. And that's fundamentally the first stepping stone to get across, because when you're doing things like improving clinical documentation and image analysis, you can do most of that through image recognition, right? Through the AI.
Yeah.
But when you're getting into diagnostics and treatment recommendations, you darn well better have a clinician in the loop that can still get clinical decision support from the AI engine, but be a little bit circumspect that the human know-how combined with the machine understanding is really the perfect combination.
Yeah, I agree with that because I think there's a special risk in healthcare. Now, let's compare the two things. Let's say you've got an MRI machine, and at the other time you've got some IT infrastructure or kind of system-wide applications that you're running that are AI-based, whether it's machine learning or generative AI. So it seems to me that if you have a fundamental problem in the AI, you're going to affect a whole lot of patients adversely really quickly. Whereas if you have a single medical device, even a large MRI, that's a kind of one-by-one usage of it. So if you see a problem, you can stop it and fix it, as opposed to having a systematic program that runs through and adds a lot of risk to patients. So
yeah, that's exactly right, Bill. In the training, no matter how you slice and dice it, it's still a black box problem. Even the experts at OpenAI, Google, other LLMs out there, all right, you've got bias in, bias out, right? And rather than mitigating or trying to mitigate the biases, even some of the players like Anthropic seems to be a little more diligent to putting in the right guardrails than OpenAI. And we're going to get to,
we'll get some more of this stuff
on that. But so rather than mitigating, these LLMs often magnify or perpetuate them, which raises questions about the accuracy, right?
Right.
And this leads to much bigger problems around ethics, legal considerations, your wheelhouse, right?
Yes.
And then you get into a bunch of other problems with alignment with human values. And I want to get to hallucinations when you want to talk about hallucinations, because that is a real gotcha.
Yeah. I'll just say that before Gen I kind of took over everybody's mind, we were doing a lot of ML, a lot of machine learning in healthcare. And because you don't know what weight the machine is giving to certain factors, we were often running two models at the same time just to see what we came up with and let the doctors have a little more insight in how they could figure out what weight was being used, because it's complicated stuff, right? So it's hard to teach. So you don't know what the software has decided to learn based on what you've decided to show it. I'll let you talk about this for a second. I think AI has great potential in healthcare because of stuff it can do with image recognition.
Image recognition, when you even look at, you probably know this metric of the 600 FDA certified apps. I mean, 90% of them are in image recognition.
Right.
Now, other use cases, dental, clinical decision support are starting to bubble in, but that's really 80 to 90% is image recognition. And it's really a narrow definition. It's really narrow AI. It isn't broad AI. So when you're getting into, let me put hallucinations, because it's really one of the biggest problems with Gen AI is when you're fabricating statements, right, that have data gaps, questionable reliability, right? And I'm just not going to pick on OpenAI here. Like Google Bard had a promotional video where the chatbot incorrectly asserted that the James Webb Space Telescope captured the first images of a planet beyond their solar systems, right? So one of the open source players, John Snow Labs, right, has on their website, and I chuckle at this, Bill, 0 hallucinations, 100% explanations.
All right, which is
I think that's right on the money. It's right on the money. Yeah.
But of course, that itself is a hallucination, right? So let's just explore hallucinations for a second, just to do a little level setting.
Okay, so Sam Altman, who's now reinserted as the CEO of OpenAI, says these fuzzy statements like hallucinations are part of their magic. And that's a lot of power. And for the more circumspect people, Bill, that raised a lot of eyebrows because humans are rather good at creativity without getting all our facts wrong.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it really begs the question about this notion of stretching the boundaries or moving the goalposts, right? So human brains can freewheel ideation without mistaking imagination for fact, which is the adverse of what OpenAI and other LLMs do, right?
Yeah.
And it's not a question of suspending disbelief. Creative capability should have expectations of accuracy. And when the LLMs are providing or trying to spin factual inaccuracy, that I think that is just really it kind of like brings in this whole notion of ethical legal considerations, Bill. What's your comment on that?
I think hallucinations are something you have to be aware of. I mean, we see it in the law case. I think the model knows if you're writing a brief, okay, you have to have a citation here, which is kind of the same thing as saying, okay, we know you need to have punctuation here. So it then gives you a citation because it knows it has to give you a citation. What's interesting is it's not like a wrong citation. It's like a fictitious citation. So that's more than hallucinating. That's like being delusional. And
yes,
yes,
delusional or tripping.
Yeah, this is the only part where it's creative, I think, or to completely make
exactly.
And creative and hallucination is a bad combination. So
really bad.
So that's my comp. But I think what you do that's so interesting, and I want to move on to that, is since you're such in the middle of what's going on with AI, is where do you see the top use cases for AI, generative AI in health in the next year, 2, 3, however fair it's good to kind of predict out? Because I know this is one of the things you do actively.
Yeah. So I really think reducing administrative overload is like huge. Okay.
Yep.
And that will allow clinicians, physician assistants, nurse practitioners to have more time for patient, engagement, which is lacking in healthcare systems today.
Right.
And that's where, and we'll get more into this, but just to kind of put it on the table, why clinics, not just Amazon One Medical, CVS, but there's some startups that are rolling out. And it's very attractive. In fact, one of the poll questions from the webinar that I did in mid-August, Bill, was going forward, will healthcare clinics become the primary care model for Americans versus hospitals? And 75% of the attendees agreed it will, because the current healthcare system is broken, and the mandate of most hospital systems, they're in the sick care business,
right?
Not the preventative care business,
right?
So that is fundamentally. So some of the other use cases that are, besides reducing, to answer your question.
So that's an internal use, right? Just some combination of automation and reducing the number of human hours that are repetitively involved. So that's like an internal use. Do you see an external use, whether it's a patient portal or something like that?
That patient portals, because a lot of them are onerous. I mean, if a lot of course, when I get the summary notes as everybody does from whatever system that you go to, and you go through Epic or Cerner.
Right.
There are more nimble plays out there that kind of create an abstraction layer on top of these big albatross systems.
Right.
And the other thing too is where you can actually combine some missing ingredients, like they kind of like ignore people with mental health, anxiety, depression. They don't bring in nutrition into these behemoth Epic or Cerner. So it creates an opportunity for clever startups, some of which I advise, to address some of these elements that are not being currently addressed, and that's a good thing.
Good.
So part of it, yeah. So part of this plays, Bill, into using predictive analytics to structure and analyze patient data with better risk stratification, and then improving the clinical documentation and support tools so you can actually come up with more pinpoint diagnostic and treatment recommendations.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And I think I'll ask your comment on this. A lot of what I see in healthcare is trying to improve the digital front door, just to get into the system if you're a patient, or even if you're just a provider who needs to get a blood test out of the hospital that you're using. And then, before I let you address this, you can have a digital door, but it's got to go to a real place, right? It just can't be a door that leads to a traditional kind of portals that probably aren't as good as your local department store. Let's have a comment on what you see about kind of patient-facing use of AI in general, and a little bit of generative AI, if you see that as coming up in the companies that you're working with.
So the number one issue on patient-facing, Bill, is people want to have better access to patient data from their healthcare providers. That is a huge problem, and it's frustrating for a lot of folks because they're only going to get the summary from Epic or Cerner or something like that, right? And they feel frustrated. The other thing is all these isolated silos. So if you've got like a autoimmune disease, which are really hard to diagnose, right? And it also begs the question, who are you going to go see when you have an autoimmune? You're going to see a neurologist, gastroenterologist, spine surgeon, blah, blah, blah. It's very, very difficult. So the collaboration amongst these health systems is it's improving, kind of, but it's really got a long way to go. And this is one of the key areas that needs to be assessed because again, what I said earlier is hospital systems are in the sick care business, not in the preventative care. And it's really incumbent upon the empowered consumer to do their own legwork to say, hey, I'll do the research. And if they're a good researcher and they know the vernacular, they can actually come up with a pretty good plan that addresses more of the preventative care. And especially as you're aging, right?
No,
that's really, really important.
I would have no idea about that, Steve, but I know you know about this, so fine.
Yeah, but how are health systems thinking about generative AI? Let's cut over to that.
Yeah.
Pretty much some of these global surveys, I just came across a recent one, and where half the clinicians around the world believe it's a good thing for direct care pathways, right? They're open to it to improve patient care. Almost two-thirds approve the clinical decision assist for patient-collected data and to guide clinical decisions. And if you move down to the younger ones, like for training medical students and nurses, it really starts to resonate there. So we got the next wave coming in, right, that are even going to be more savvy to the benefits of AI tools.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen the use case where a procedure, an operation will be recorded, and then it'll be annotated by a human being, and then it'll be used to train physicians as they prepare for a more complicated case, and then it'll be used to train medical students, kind of as a case study. And then, I mean, some of the AI I've seen is to have the AI go in and remove the personally identifying information, blur a face, remove a tattoo, and that would be human intensive to do that image by image, operation by operation. But that's kind of a low-level thing that AI can do to make these training videos both useful and regulatory compliant, or at least reduce the risk of regulatory non-compliance. But,
no, absolutely. I mean, you hit it right on the head. If the work is procedural workflow, automate thing. I mean, that is really where the efficacy and the use cases really, really bubble up. The corollary to this is you talk about the executives, the C-level folks, talk about innovation,
Yeah.
and with AI to achieve growth, but the fallacy in that almost 100% they say we believe in innovation, but only 21% of these executives definitely met their innovation. So there's a troubling in terms of how do you really start to get projects. Start with the low-hanging fruit, and then you move up the food chain. In fact, one of my engagements is a clinician-led healthcare AI advisory group called MI10, and so it's a clinician-led healthcare AI education and adoption. And we have this tool called MIQ that measures your AI readiness. And we actually compared about 20 or so hospitals.
Yeah. What does AI readiness mean? What does AI readiness mean?
Exactly. It's a darn good question. So really what we're saying is we're trying to rank them for your roadmap to an AI-enabled future. And what that really means is in this, it's really three major categories. It's the AI, machine learning. So in other words, what tools are you using, LLMs and so forth.
Right.
And that's the easier one. The harder one is really the business side, which is really the organizational commitment and budget, their strategy, the management interests, and buy-in from the organization. That's the stickier ingredient because a lot of folks, I mean, when you really look at it, when you do an AI product development, you usually stand up a proof of concept, then you build your model, then you go through testing and production. But a lot of the deployments, they don't get out of the proof of concept. They're stuck. And that's where you really need a lot of these systems. Yeah, they have to go out of house to bring in a confident AI developer,
right,
which is fine. But there's a lot of other of these parameters in order to be able to really move to an enterprise deployment is my point.
So there's two ways to approach this. When we say how are healthcare systems thinking about generative AI, that's kind of the provider community, the hospitals and other systems.
Yep.
So we've kind of touched on that, and I'm going to invite you to say more. And then the other side is looking at that environment. What are the startups and emerging and new tech companies as the best area to develop AI tools, where the hospital is a user, a customer, whatever you want to say on that end of it? What are you seeing? I mean, that's what you do a lot of, so I'm kind of interested in.
I do a lot of that. Yes, that's exactly right. So really what it really boils down to is really having the use cases really, really well vetted. And what I mean by that is, first you have to have this awareness of what are the resource constraints? What is our technical expertise, right?
Right.
You've got to have that delineated, okay? And you've got to do design engineering before you get into the training of the models, okay? And a lot of players will go with what they see in the market and the hype. Like OpenAI, it's really interesting is when you look at the models that respondents are building, the latest stats from a recent study that I saw is about 20 to 25% are using ChatGPT. A little bit lower are developing their own models using open source, right? Which I think is great. In fact, there was this new startup, Together AI, just raised $102 million to create a cloud platform that allowed developers anywhere to build open and custom AI models.
That's interesting.
So the irony is, OpenAI started as open source, but it's now pretty much a closed source, and it's just craziness out there. But I really like this whole notion of kind of like flipping it, and you got to find the appropriate use cases, right?
Right.
Because if it's badly thought out, poorly implemented, it's going to be a non-starter. You're not going to get out of, like I said, POC.
Yeah. Yeah, and to deploy stuff at scale, you have to get out of the proof of concept phase.
Yep.
And you have to know that you've proved the concept. Any comments on that? Because I think that's particularly difficult in healthcare, defining success.
It totally is. And that's where, even when I talk to my colleagues at MI10, and they even Dr. Anthony Chang, who heads things up there, he's a children's pediatricologist at Chalk, he says, even they're having some difficulty. It's really, you've got to test. There's a lot of moving parts here. So if you really broke it down, I would quantify it into the appropriate business use cases, number one, like I stated. Concern about, like, your wheelhouses, legal issues, risk compliance, who owns the copyright for AI generated output, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what risks to test for: security, unexpected outcomes, safety, reliability, fairness, bias, ethics, privacy. Wow. I mean,
right.
It takes really rigorous work and you're the expert here. I mean, if you don't have a policy designed to mitigate legal problems that require regulatory compliance and exposing the company to unknown liabilities, you're really skating on thin ice, Bill.
Well, I agree with that. And I have two comments. I think where it gets tough, sometimes with AI companies who are just moving into healthcare, that's not their vertical, or they're moving into it from a tech perspective, not a regulatory perspective. What they don't know is that you have HIPAA data, which consists of X elements. If you're doing experimental work, you can use more of those elements, more personal data. And then if you go to a commercialization phase, then you can't use all of the same identifiers that you use in the experimental phase or the research phase.
Exactly.
So that becomes a compliance problem. It becomes kind of a management problem to figure out when the AI company has kind of moved over, which is a legal judgment that you have to make. And then we can get to malicious code and kind of stuff like that, but you don't want a virus running through your commercial system because you've imported the wrong kind of personal health information on that stage of development. So I presume that the companies you work with understand this, because I know you.
They understand more of it, for sure.
I know you.
Even there's still a bit of learning and coaching, and you've got to have that mindset and mentality, because a lot of the startups that I work with, they're mostly geeks, and they technically, in terms of the model selection and designing a solution, but some of these other ingredients we've been talking about. And one I want to make sure I get, this is for startups as well as established companies, Bill. If the culture isn't there to recognize the appropriate business use cases, or the C-level folks are too dismissive by not getting, buy-in from the real workers, then you're going to have a problem.
Right. And that goes back to my point. So now you've put in a fundamental problem into your IT infrastructure that's very hard to remove. And flipping to something that it triggered in my mind, but if you're a data guy, and data professionals are not IT guys, it's a different organization. It's much easier for them to build in regulatory compliance than to try and retrofit it in. So I'm sure you have comments on that, but when you have a lot of people coming in, a lot of emerging companies coming in that are building certain data structures, or they're doing something with unstructured data, you've got to know that this is an industry with regulations, a pretty well established set of regulations, and some regulators who are paying attention, because patient health just ups the whole game here. As far as
it totally does. You've really bubbled up. This is a perfect segue, Bill, to the challenges of adoption.
Okay.
When you have biases in privacy and lack of transparency and explainability. So, for instance, if the AI creates medical errors, it will create a liability. So, I want to really talk about. We should just have one call out to the Biden's executive order on AI is non-binding and vague. So, a good step, but not a small step. If you look at a couple of ethic luminaries like Joy Bolimi were giving AI companies a free pass. Timit Gubru, who co-led the Google ethical team before a clash with the company and was ousted.
Yeah.
She says, these companies won't self-regulate because of the AI gold rush. And that's what we're seeing. The reason this whole, what I call OpenAI shit show, right? Where, Altman was removed and then Nadella, because they've got 10 billion into OpenAI, did some backroom dealing and got him reinserted and took off the only two women on the board of directors. And it just shows you that why on earth would the biggest players in AI want to be regulated? It's not for making the future of AI safer. It's for enriching their pockets.
So you're saying they're more able to comply with the regulations and the expense of doing that than the smaller companies are? Is that what you're saying? Or
No, I'm saying it's a game system. They can comply, but when again, there's non-binding agreements where, like I said, there is not going to be regulation. There's just too much at stake, right? This is the gold rush that's going on, is my point. So that's where startups really have to be a lot more clever to be able to say, hey, I'm going to create a real solution, like one of my engagements that is using co-pilots for transcription, automatic medical coding, and clinical decision support. That is marvelous. That's a real good, tangible use case. And they are aware of everything else we talked about here to make it a solution. And they're getting the most traction right now in physician offices and clinics before moving upstream to bigger healthcare systems.
Is that deliberate as a marketing strategy, or is that an industry statement? That's a deliberate focus.
It's deliberate because even though they've been very frugal with the need for fun, and that's the other thing is today as a startup, you've got to get enough customer traction with valid testimonials and getting up to a reasonable monthly recurring revenue if you want to raise that a small seed round. Because it's just really, that's the terms. Whereas the big players, they just get this huge amount of money, the billions of dollars, or because they have this, they're in the club. There's only 1% or less than 1% that's in the club. The other 99 have to do it the hard way, which is grind it out. And so you've got to have that rock solid MVP, preferably commercial viable product or something in between, and get it out there. And if you want to raise, for instance, a small seed round of 2 million, well, you better have a minimum of 50,000 monthly recurring revenue, preferably closer to 100. Then you can slam dunk it. But a lot of these other startups, it is what they don't recognize is that the team is 60 to 70% of the weighting criteria. So if you just have a bunch of tech geeks as co-founders, that ain't going to cut it either.
So I want to shift gears a little bit. So Steve, I know you're seeing a lot of work about the legal side of implementing AI. And I'd like to ask what you see between in-house legal teams and external counsel in healthcare related to AI.
So for the early stage startups, it's all external counsel. So until you Series A minimum, sometimes even B, then you can bring in an in-house lawyer. But you're still going to rely, as Bill, when you're dealing with IP and patents, then they're going to find an out-of-house to cover that for them, right? So that's really that's the other thing versus the big cats out there. You've got to get your patent, your IP protection going earlier, the better. and to take it from provisional to fully
Right.
issued. That's really, really important to be cognizant of and get it done.
Yeah. So the only observation I'll make is I think a lot of people think provisionals are quick and easy. So to do a decent job on a provisional, you're doing like 80% of the work that you would do on a utility. So there's some advantage
Okay.
to just doing all of it at once. And then, because
Yeah.
if you file a provisional, the patent office doesn't do anything. It just sits there reserving your date until you file the real application,
Uh-huh.
the utility application. So I'm just observing this as an IP lawyer, that if you want to get the thing to
Right.
issue sooner, you have to get off the provisional sooner. As long as you're spending
Right.
money on lawyers, you have to decide whether you're going to spend X dollars on the provisional and then go spend X plus Y plus Z on the utility, or just spend X plus Y and get the utility done faster. And
Yeah, good point. And I think it's interesting. One of my engagements has this really impressive clinical trial of like 500,000 users, and the results. This is in precision nutrition, were really spectacular. But there's been kind of like it's going too slow. They have the provisionals out there, but to get the utility, and this is sort of like the yin and yang of when you've got what comes first is product development, right? And then you got to pay your cloud bill, which can get, if you run out of credits, oh my God, and you're not generating enough revenue, then it gets a little dicey, right? So that's where you've got to get the right blend of things going, not just focus. And that's really the trials and tribulations. You've got to, it's sort of like you got to keep the pipeline primed when you have a product that is ready to sell. But you've got to, and that's really, until you close a good seed size round, you can't bring in enough. And if the CEO or co-founders think they can do it all themselves, even though they may be technically astute, Bill, they're not going to make it. They're not going to make it. And that's, what I try to come in as the gray-haired advisor to say, hey, you've got to look at the forest through the trees as well as the trees.
That's an interesting way to do it. I think you know where your domain expertise begins and ends, and that's where
that's really that's such an important point, because when I looked at engagements, I look for the chemistry, authenticity, and the open-mindedness on behalf of the co-founder or co-founding team to bring in experts, whether they be legal experts, biz dev, force multiplier experts. If they don't have that mentality, I'm not coming in, because I know it's probably not going to meet with a successful
So let's switch to kind of an extension of that. So you've got somebody who's thinking carefully. What are you seeing as far as what's being prioritized by legal teams in this new era of Gen AI, and what is being prioritized and what should be prioritized? I want to ask a compound question here.
Okay. So I think you need to get some quick wins.
Okay.
First of all,
Okay.
when you're implementing generative AI, and for example, right, the automation of routine workflows, summarization of complex agreements, automated risk assessment of portfolios, and enable legal teams to maximize their value.
All right. So
right? And that goes that impacts the bottom line.
Yeah. Right.
So that's a quick win, right? So you need to get that cadence going on some quick wins to kind of get into the flow there, right? And then these processes and then can kind of morph to enable non-legal end issues where you can actually get your contracts, maintaining the legal and compliance guardrails. And guess what? It starts to turn into kind of an easy, seamless experience, which is necessary.
And
especially when you're competing against the big cats.
And you have a view of what's going to be prioritized in a year or two when there's more entities using more curated large language models and they fine-tune them, so it's not so much just complete open models?
Correct. It's fine tuning. That's
Yeah.
exactly right, Bill. Yep.
So what are you seeing in the market around the thinking about fine tuning and how to adjust commercial plans to that?
Yeah, and that's really the art of the deal. I mean, not all of it, a number of my engagements are they're either fine-tuning LLMs or putting together their own best of breed partnerships. Because you can't build everything yourself today. You need to leverage the right partners. Like I'm dealing with a company that has a generative emotional AI to create these empathetic virtual agents. And yes, they have, and they're being very diligent on having patents on the right elements for the emotional intelligence. But in terms of the partnerships that they've created, I mean, when I engaged with them, I already knew every one of their partnerships. So I said, yes, you did some really good vetting here. And then when you have that, then you can implement your journey, okay, on it, which is less daunting and resource constrained, right? Which is wonderful. And that gets you up on the curve to be able to get deployments and then help scale, close funding, et cetera, et cetera. Speaking of that, I just wanted one call out on the funding issue is that Americans have a fetish for unicorns because of all the money that has flowed into OpenAI, Anthropic,
This is got to come back to bite you. Fetish and unicorns. Just warning.
Exactly. Yeah. So the thing about it, there's some VCs like Christina Farr at Almars Ventures in Toronto, she was like a writer before she became a VC. She's a terrific writer, but she says, I've been spending a lot of this year reflecting on what's going on in the state of venture and health tech. And what she said is there's a relative abundance of far smaller exits in the 100 to 500 million. And even more common is 40 to 100 million. So check this out. I say, since I do a lot of early stage, I say, listen, it isn't how much money you raise, it's how little you raise to get to the biggest exit. Okay. So the game, okay, is first of all, get to that first million ARR as quick as you can.
What's ARR?
If you can do it on friends and annual recurring revenue. Yeah. Get to that first million, because that's what VCs is. If you don't, some of them don't even look at you until you crack the one, some even up to 2 million ARR, right? So you got to get that as quick as you can. After you get that, you can raise a small seed round, 2 to 4 million. And then you race to get to 5 million, okay? And then the magic number in the startup game is getting to 10 million ARR. Because when you get to 10 million ARR, you're going to be taken seriously. Like, oh, here's an emerging player. Now, if you got to 10 million ARR on less than 10 million in funding, you're carrying $100 million valuation.
Okay.
That's like a double grand slam. That's a 10x. Because in the VC game, only a small sliver of their portfolio, like on the order of 5 to 10%, are their real winners. The average return for these bigger funds is only like a 2x. Okay. A lot of people just don't get that, right? So in other words, if you were a startup and you got to 10 million ARR in less than 10 million, and some suitor comes along and says, hey, I want to drop 100, 120 million on you. If the conditions are right, and the beauty of it is that with the metrics that I gave you on the raise, VCs are only going to own 35, maybe 40% of your company. So the co-founders and the employee stock option pool and advisors that help guide them there are going to say, let's take it, and then go on to the next one.
Yeah.
So in other words, she's right. It's really, I really am, that's what I focus on is small. Forget the unicorn thing. Get 100 to couple, to 250 million, and that's a great exit. Some VC just posted a post here. I haven't got back to her yet on the markdown in healthcare from overfunded companies. I won't name names, but if you look at what they're doing right now, is the VCs are giving discounts like on the order of 60 to 80%. And it just shows you that it's the craziness in terms of coming in at a too high valuation. And now they're trying to like keep the money flowing into them. And that's where I say I'm a lean startup guy for the most part. That's where I really think lean startups are the new black.
I'm digesting that, but okay. So this is what I want to close with. I want to ask you what you think. I'm putting my lawyer's hat back on now. What you think lawyers, either externally or internally engaged with the kind of companies you deal with, the AI-focused companies, what should their legal teams be focusing on?
I would say one of them is contract management, which can have a direct impact on the bottom line. That is, when you have that down, legal teams can also mitigate the risk and automate compliance measures, right? Which will help safeguard the company's financial performance.
All right. That's one.
And so that's one. And then if you can kind of imbue this understanding where legal is adding that efficiency and effectiveness to the operations of the company, it's going to flow a whole lot better and stronger as a result of that. So it's really establishing a consciousness of sorts, Bill, to kind of like say to the CEO, the co-founding teams, you really need a good legal team that is not just doing your IP stuff, but can kind of like be embedded into the framework like finance, operations, etc. I think that's really the objective.
That's great. All right. So my final question is, what question should I have asked you? I'm trying to figure out actually a clever way to ask you in a more open-ended way, the trends that you see that are really important to you. So assuming I didn't ask them, what should I have asked you about that?
So my question to you is it's a two-part question. Comment on IP protection for generative AI prompts. And then the follow-up to that is, how do you think generative AI will impact the relationship between in-house legal teams and external counsel in terms of the types of work they do?
So let me do the second one first. So I think that generative AI is, for all its characteristics, good and bad, it does have a certain utility. And it's not going to replace real thought, but it is a tool that leads to efficiency. So I'll give you just kind of a weird, or at least I'll give you an example. I was just hired by an AI company, and I asked the AI company, why and how did you hire me? And they told me they did a generative AI search. Yeah.
That's great.
And I looked at that and I said, well, let me see the prompts. I'm just kind of curious. I saw the prompts, and then I said, let me see what you got back. And it's an AI company, so they were very willing to share this. But what I see there is it was really just kind of speed dating through the internet. And it was just scraping a lot of stuff. A lot of it came off my bio. A lot of it came off my publications. But the point is, it can be a tool for doing those things really quickly. Now, no one's going to hire a lawyer based on ChatGPT's kind of exaggerated, he's an esteemed practitioner in the field. I mean, that's somehow somebody programmed this to have Baroque language. But my point is that I think it's a tool, right? So as a lawyer in private practice, I think most law firms are going to use Gen AI as a tool, and just by analogy, it's going to get a rough draft, right? And then you're going to take it from there. But I think clients are going to want to ask for that.
Right. So you're saying, Bill, are you saying so So as part of this new
Yeah.
gig that you have, so what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Gen AI will take over the mundane, routine legal
Yeah.
tasks,
Yeah.
and then you can redirect your efforts to work on more strategic
I don't know.
conflict.
I kind of rephrase that if you don't mind. I don't know that it's mundane, but it's going to
Sure.
go kind of data mine your own LLM or virtual equivalent of your own contract database, for example. So if you code your stuff properly, you're going to say, go find me a license grant with certain attributes. Okay. I could do that. My associates could do that.
Right.
If you're in a good shape technically, AI can do it faster. Now, as a lawyer, I'm going to tell you that's great.
Right.
That's like a first rough
Right.
draft. So I've got my own memory, and I've got my own kind of assessment of what I'm getting back, which from a partner is not that different from working with a junior lawyer. But yeah, that just speeds it up. Just like when the guy hired me, I think that Gen AI just did faster what a human being would do. And then
Exactly.
He wasn't asking Gen AI to make the judgment. He was just saying, give me a bunch of facts. Give me some stuff. So I think that's one thing. I think the other side of the fence is going to be, okay, Mr. Law Firm or Ms. Law Firm or Law Firm, why aren't you using Gen AI? Why aren't you saving me legal fees? So I think you're going to see the two sides, which are disclosed when you're using it, and then why are you not using it when it's appropriate because it has financial advantages? So that's what I see is becoming how do clients manage law firms with respect to generative AI?
Exactly. So let me ask you this question, Bill. So, I mean, every startup and bigger company wants to reduce expensive outside counsel, but Gen AI is a good means to that end. But the follow-up question is, do you think the adoption of Gen AI may increase competition amongst law firms as they compete for a more limited pool of work?
I'm not sure it's going to increase competition in a different way. I think the competition exists for lawyers that do good work at a reasonable price. And then Gen AI is a tool to doing good work at a reasonable price. It's not a substitution for being we went back in the very beginning, right? A doctor's not going to just stop being a doctor because there's a machine learning program there.
Right.
And a lawyer's not going to stop being a lawyer because you ran some sophisticated software over your own data and you trust your own data. But how do I want to say this? I think Gen AI is like a really smart toddler. It finds stuff. It doesn't necessarily understand what it's found, but it'll bring it back to you. So the answer to your
So would you say? Yeah, I agree with that, Bill. I want to roll back because I'm curious on your perspective. Because if you're a startup that is taking a large language model and fine tuning it, that startup should be cognizant of, and they have a certain methodology in their prompting, right? What should they do to get IP protection for generative AI prompts?
Are the whole AI world kind of meets the whole metaphysical world of IP. So it's an interesting match because an IP, patents, copyrights, trademarks, you can't protect an idea. It's always some implementation of the idea that gets protection under one of these regimes, right? So you're going to have to think about what is it about a prompt that has some distinctive quality to it. So the first thing that jumps to mind is trade secrets, right? Why are you going to use a prompt? You're going to want your company's employees to do good queries. So part of it's quality control, right? It's going to be, we want specific answers, and we want to limit the amount of noise we're getting from the prompts and the searches. And so let's assume that's really good. So that provides a competitive advantage in your industry, right? Because you can just do research faster, right? So you're going to want to protect that. I think that the safest and first way to protect that is with trade secrets, because you avoid some of the copyright problems. Now, the problem with trade secrets are they have to be secret, and you have to derive economic value from the secrecy. So that's one regime of IP that's going to work. So prompts are words, and that gives to rise a trademark or copyright protection. So now you have a certain level of the databases of the library of prompts. So that's where I see the protection lying down.
Now, to add on to that, I also, if I may add to what you just stated, which I totally agree with, is LLMs, when you're fine-tuning an LLM, LLMs do not have any common sense reasoning to generate meaning. And because they don't have any understanding of what's true or false, right? So if you can have guidance on IP protection and can imbue explainability, right, into the equation rather than just relying on mindless parroting or next word prediction, right? That's a good thing, and it also builds moats and protection around your
so we've
IP.
got to the point now where you can't do good AI without good data, basically, and that is AI is the AI tech itself. It's the data that feeds it, and it's the people that do both. So someone's got to curate the data. Someone's got to make sure that it's actually usable, whether it's structured or unstructured. So those are kind of the things that I see going into how do you develop an IP structure, right? And then the other question is this worth protecting to begin with? Or is it like, okay, I'll just do it another way because IP protection has its limits. I'm going to say you can design around it just for the sake of a convenient term. So one of the things you have to think about is this really a competitive advantage or not? And then there are two sides to that. One is against your competitors. Another is the risk that an employee is going to leave and take the good stuff to the next employer. So you want to go to the next employer and say, this stuff is copyright or otherwise intellectual property of me, the former employer, and you can't use it. So part of it is to protect yourself against an employee who's moving on and has access to what you think are valuable things. So to get that done, you've got to be able to document it. And that's where policies come in, documentation comes in. Copyright's automatic, but if you have a registration, you have a registration that's a piece of paper that's normally more compelling than just an assertion. So I think I focused on your question. At least I hope I have. But
no, you did. Yeah. You did address it beautifully. So I know we're kind of coming to the end, but I want to have one call out to one of the pioneers from yesteryear for the youngins, right? That are not plus 60. So this is from Doug Engelbart. Now, one of the greatest demos it's called the mother of all demos when Doug Engelbart was at Xerox Park. In 1968, it was just a fabulous. It's on. You can find it. You just type in the mother of all demos. But this actually was the seed corn for Steve Jobs, who kind of glommed onto it and formed Apple after that. But he said this way back then: technology should not aim to replace humans, rather amplify human capabilities.
So we're back to where we started, because you started with augmentation. And I think we've now come full circle and identified that technology is an augmentation tool. It's not a thing in and of itself. Well, anyhow, Steve, this has been terrific. I really want to thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Absolutely.
I appreciate both the observations and the specific illustrations you've been able to pull from being a force multiplier. I wanted to mention that again.
You gotta live up to it, otherwise you're just another empty suit.
You're definitely a force, Steve.
It was really wonderful, flowing, engaging conversation, Bill. So thank you very much for doing this podcast.
Terrific. Okay, thanks again, Steve.
Bye-bye, Bill.
Thanks for listening to AI and Data Law, part of the PLI Evercurrent podcast. Please note that the views and opinions expressed in this podcast represent those of the host and individuals being interviewed, and not necessarily those of PLI. For more AI-related content from the Practicing Law Institute, visit pli.edu/AIPod.